We've touched on COVID a little already, but we'd be remiss if we didn't take some time to dive deeper, because the pandemic and its effects are imprinted on every single conversation we're going to have over the next 3 days. That's why finding the political will and global solidarity to ensure vaccines for all must be a top priority, no matter where you are. So, to kick off this conversation, we're pleased to turn the stage over to a, if not the, leading global authority on this ongoing public health crisis. Please welcome the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus.
The COVID-19 pandemic has shown what humanity is capable of at its best and worst. The development of several safe and effective vaccines in record time is a stunning scientific achievement. But the shocking inequity in the global distribution of those vaccines is a stain on our collective conscience. WHO's targets are to support all countries to vaccinate at least 40% by the end of this year and 70% of the world's population by the middle of next year. More than 70% of high-income countries have already reached the 40% target. Not a single low-income country has got there yet. That's why I have called for a global moratorium on booster doses until the end of this year to allow countries that are farthest behind to catch up. With the help of vaccines, we will defeat this pandemic, but we will still be left with many of the same problems we had before it started. There is no vaccine for climate change, poverty, hunger, racism, gender equality, non-communicable diseases, nor for many of the other social, economic, and environmental determinants of health. The pandemic is a powerful demonstration that health is not a nice to have. It is the foundation of social, economic, and political stability. And that's why we must all continue to work together to drive progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals and a healthier, safer, fairer future. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tedros. And now we're so pleased to be joined by an activist turned UN leader. She sounded the alarm early on about vaccine apartheid. And as the pandemic unfolded, she threw her considerable power behind the People's Vaccine Alliance to champion the notion of vaccines as a global public good. Please welcome veteran politician, diplomat, mechanical engineer, and executive director of UNAIDS, Winnie Byanyima. Winnie, welcome.
Thank you very much. Delighted.
We're so glad to have you with us. And we'd love to hear more about the People's Vaccine Alliance, maybe to start. So for folks who aren't familiar with it, can you walk us through the current efforts and also maybe what challenges the organization and the movement are facing at this moment?
Okay. The Alliance came to be before even a vaccine had been found. When we saw governments putting money behind finding a vaccine or a cure for COVID, we were excited, but we were also aware that having a vaccine wouldn't in itself mean that everybody was going to have it and was going to be safe from COVID. We had the experience, and by we, I mean the people from the HIV movement, people living with HIV today or at risk of HIV. They knew that in 1996, when antiretrovirals were found and people in rich countries were getting these tablets and living safe and healthy and long lives, people continued to die in the developing countries. 9 million people died before the prices came down to be afforded by the developing countries. So we didn't want that repeat of the HIV history. We came together, I called up my friends from civil society, and we formed the People's Vaccine Alliance. Today, we are a huge movement of organizations of civil society, some UN agencies, Nobel Prize winners, academics, epidemiologists. It's a huge coalition. We have very few and very clear demands, which are, let's get behind a global plan that will deliver a vaccine to everyone free of charge. And it is easy. We've done the maths. With 8 billion vaccines, it would cost about $25 billion, but you would need that first, the technology is shared. You can't have a handful of companies serving the whole world. Share the technology and the science, share, open up the market by removing the intellectual property rules so that those who can produce are not at risk of being sued. Put some money behind manufacturing in other regions like Africa that don't have manufacturing capacity. Put some money behind local manufacturing there. And that way we will get enough supply for everybody. But sadly, and share the vaccines which are there today, because we also have rich countries hoarding, having more than they need. So these are the few demands we are making, but we are very far from there, sadly. Our demands have been signed on, supported by more than 175 Nobel laureates and former presidents. 2.7 million people have signed our petition. I mean, 70% of people in rich countries agree with us. We've done the opinion polling. But sadly, a handful of rich countries, their leaders are not bringing their pharmaceuticals to the table and asking them to share their technology. Yet, $100 billion was put in by taxpayers' money. So it's not even their technology when you think about it. It's paid for by ordinary people. We need leaders to have the courage to ask them to share their technology and to agree to the TRIPS waiver at the WTO so that those who can manufacture it without any legal repercussions. So these are the simple things we need.
They are simple. You can probably see I don't know whether to shake my head or just what to say as I listen to you talking, because everything that you're saying is common sense. And in a lot of ways, we thought the hard part would be developing the vaccine, but that proved to be much more accessible. So the idea that we're in a moment where the logistics and sort of cooperation of distribution are the things that are eluding us is deeply discouraging. But for someone in your position, someone who I have to say called your friends to essentially get us down this road, and you have this incredible ability to be in the room and to have these conversations, who needs to do what for us to fix this moving forward? You obviously have great experience in past movements, but looking forward, what do businesses need to do? What do governments need to do? What can citizens do to support the efforts? And how do we actually move the ball forward? Because this is unacceptable. I don't think that's an overstatement.
Good question. First, at least 120 countries are today supporting the TRIPS waiver at the WTO. We need a consensus for the rules to be suspended temporarily on the vaccines and other COVID medicines. What we need is that the United Kingdom, Germany, the European Union in particular, those three, maybe Switzerland as well, line up behind the others. So a handful of rich countries whose companies own this technology are still holding out. We need them to line up. America is behind it, Australia is behind it, France is behind it. So we need these countries also to line up to remove temporarily the restrictions on intellectual property. Secondly, we need the rich countries that have overbooked and are hoarding vaccines to immediately hand over their excess supply to the developing countries. Today in Africa, whole economies are being closed down, opened, closed, simply because there's not enough vaccines. Every time they open up, infection rates go up, they close again, they are sinking. Kids are not in school. So get their excess vaccines to the developing countries in time for them to vaccinate their people, not to bring them when they're expiring. So that's a message to all the rich countries that have excess doses, their governments. Thirdly, we need to get these companies to stop being greedy. I have to put it that way. At least 9 of them have become billionaires overnight. They are earning obscene profits for their vaccines, for their technology. If they accept to share it through the CTAP, this is a WHO COVID technology access pool, they will still make profits, but they will not make super profits. So honestly, they must stop putting profits before lives and accept to share their technology. That's a challenge to companies. And to the rest of us, let's keep putting pressure.
I think pressure is an important watchword, because everything that you're saying sounds completely fair. And the fact of the matter is no one is safe until everyone is vaccinated at a minimum. So there's a thing that's sort of happening, and I'd love your thoughts on this, where the optics seem right. We have organizations, individuals, governments saying all the right things and making the commitments and sort of getting on the right track in terms of the language. And yet the action doesn't always follow. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and how we ratchet up the pressure so that there's actual follow through on all of these commitments and conversations that are happening, so that we won't be in this position again a year from now or 10 years from now. Because in a lot of ways, what we've experienced in this pandemic is almost a dry run for the bigger problems potentially of climate and other just great ills that humanity is around the corner from facing if we're not actually facing them at this moment.
You're so right. What is going on right now is immoral. It doesn't make economic sense. And for me, as an African woman, I even see racism in it. Yes, to allow people of one whole continent to keep dying at the rate at which death is happening, when you have a solution. And they are asking, today the African Union was here in Geneva, and they were saying, we want to buy, let us buy. But you won't even let them buy, you put them at the back of the queue, and a handful of companies will hold on, hike their price, and make it impossible for people to live. So, to the extent that even recently, Africa, which is bleeding, is doing fill and finish for Johnson & Johnson. And they were caught sending 10 million doses out to a rich country when Africa hasn't been able to vaccinate even 2% of its people. This is immoral. So everything that they have said, rich countries, has been like a drop in the ocean, their promises, and they don't even fulfill them. That's the truth. They've promised billions of doses. They have millions of doses, hundreds of millions that have not arrived. They sometimes blame the weaker ones by saying, well, we don't think they have the capacity. We think there's vaccine hesitancy. How can you say vaccine hesitancy when you don't even have 2% people vaccinated? So we see many excuses being made that don't add up. What we need is to heed to the voice of the Secretary General of the United Nations to have a global action plan for countries to come around the table, enable some more manufacturing to happen, and have production and supply quickly for the whole world. This is it's not difficult. It just takes some leadership.
It just takes some leadership. I want to put underlines and italics and bold over that statement. I think it's heartbreaking to hear you talk about this notion that people are producing vaccines that they won't be allowed to have access to. And in fact, their names are being maligned because there's a suggestion that 98% of them just aren't interested in the vaccine. When the reality is that they're not even being given that option. And so going back to that idea of leadership, what needs to happen right now for us to apply the pressure so that leaders get us to this place? If there were one thing that you could say to our audience right now that they could do when they sign off from this incredible session, what's the thing that they can do to actually move the needle here? Because it does seem like we're really struggling to make that leap.
I think we must stand together in solidarity and raise our voices. This is so important. It's important that young people, women, people living with HIV, everyone around the world should speak out and find a way to express themselves against what President Ramaphosa has called vaccine apartheid. That's absolutely key. But secondly, to direct our demands to the leaders of the rich countries. They really are getting close. One by one, we are seeing some of them signing on. For example, the United States, President Biden supported the TRIPS waiver. So have some other Western leaders. Others have even gone as far as accepting that technology should come into the technology access pool, COVID pool for sharing. But they are taking too long. Millions are dying. Today, 4.4 million lives have been lost to this virus. How many more will go before they all come and agree? So pressure and speaking to the leaders directly that they can make a difference for the whole world.
And we should not accept even one more loss. Oh, sorry, carry on.
Exactly. I mean, the International Chamber of Commerce did a calculation and said the global economy is losing $9 trillion every year because of COVID. And most of this is lost to the richer countries. So really, we all gain if we fight and end this pandemic.
We all gain. And I want to close with one sort of more perhaps philosophical question. Selfishness. There's something happening here with human nature. And I wonder if you could just reflect for a moment on how we push ourselves individually to be willing to take that hit, so that it isn't that we want our booster before many people around the world have even had the chance to have their first shot, so that we aren't in a situation where we are so used to and entitled to hoarding resources that we are willing to let millions of people die around the world simply because they don't live within our borders. What do we need to do in terms of our own individual introspection to get us to a place where we recognize how important and just absolutely crucial that is to maintaining our humanity?
You have raised a good question. And my answer to you is that actually, most people are well-meaning and want to reach out to their neighbor and want to share. And our opinion polls prove that across the world, people are saying, even in those rich countries with the vaccine, that there should be no profits for anyone before we are over the pandemic. So majority of people are really wanting to stand together and solve the problem for everyone. So where's the problem? And it's good you mentioned the booster, because that tells that story. I was in Oxford last week and I met Professor Pollard, who is the director of the Oxford vaccine group that discovered this vaccine of Oxford AstraZeneca. I asked him about the booster. He was very clear to me that the case for the booster, the jury is still out. It is not proven. But why is the booster now being given? He said maybe for a very small group of very vulnerable people, but that generally the case for everyone to have a booster isn't there. They haven't proven it. But why is it happening? Because some politicians want to de-risk, want to be absolutely sure that the virus would not come back to close their economies, to hurt their people. So it's about de-risking. It's not about even the science proving. So in other words, what we are seeing is politicians more worried about their votes, their next election, and less worried about a whole global economy that is disrupted and many lives that are dying. So to me, it's the short-sightedness of some leaders that's put us where we are today. 2 years ago, if our call had been heeded, 2 years ago, if a global plan was put in place and technology shared, this thing would be gone. We'd be talking about it as gone. But there's some short-sightedness of leadership at a political level. If we could wake their eyes up to what is at stake for all of us, we'll get there.
We'll get there. I think that's a great place to end. And I so appreciate you pointing out that on a human level, the majority of people believe exactly what you're saying. So there is no room for self-interest. There is no room for wanting 100% safety for yourself and being okay with 2% safety for everybody else. That's just not the way forward. Winnie Byanyima, my goodness, what a wonderful conversation. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I cannot say it enough for helping us to open this 2021 SDG Action Zone. And we just look forward to seeing you so much more. And we are so lucky to have you on the front lines of this fight. I can't tell you how grateful we are.
We're so lucky to have you and offering this platform to all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.